starting with FNAF 4 in 1983. So the timeline starts off with not FNAF 2 like I've been thinking, but rather with FNAF 4. FNAF 4 takes place in 1983 as we see from the Fredbear and Fred's cartoon on the TV in Crying Child's house, which is already weird because of the lead up to Security Breach, but that's a whole other can of worms. At this point in the timeline though, William has already built the Springlock animatronics and the Funtime animatronics, since Elizabeth had already been gotten by Circus Baby. That is seemingly the only explanation we have for the stomach mounds on the Nightmare animatronics. So even before the first game starts, a Fazbear location closed down, and probably the local one, so William opened up Circus Babies to keep up his killing spree. And then it got closed down as well after the first day because his daughter gets scooped. We then have the events of FNAF 4 when Crying Child is having his birthday at Freddy's come the end of the week. When he gets there though, he's scared because he watched his sister get scooped, and then he ends up getting shoved into Fredbear's mouth and put in a coma. After fighting through a nightmare trying to stay alive, William pulls the plug and promises to put him back together. It's another question if he actually does though. Crying Child dies and then probably goes on to possess his father as the one you should not have killed. Next we have Into the Pit in 1985. And while this next moment in the timeline isn't a part of the games, it's an important moment because it's the moment time travel, like real actual time travel, is introduced into the series through a ball pit of all places. This is the half of the story that takes place in 1985 before the missing children's incident, where Oswald is jumping in and out of the ball pit to play with his new friends Chip and Mike, who are around his age, which is around 11. But one day when he comes out of the ball pit, he hears screaming and ends up being lured into a room with 6 dead kids, a representation for Charlie, Gabriel, Fritz, Jeremy, Susie, and Cassidy. He then runs into the ball pit to return to his current year in order to escape Spring Bonnie. Then we have FNAF 2 in 1987. Thanks to the date we see on the paychecks we get at the end of the game, we know this to be true. This is after the missing children's incident, but the year of the bite of 87, which is when presumably the night guard Jeremy gets his frontal lobe bitten off and then gets promoted to the day shift, which is where we come in. This is the grand reopening after the 1985 fiasco that resulted in the restaurant closing its doors, as we see in the news clippings from FNAF 1, and is when the toy animatronics are created and used, installed with a criminal database in an effort to prevent another incident from occurring. Whether they actually have these things or are just said to have them for parents to feel better is one question, but even if they did have them, we know that William is the suit technician, meaning that if they did have a database, he'd have programmed it and certainly would not include himself. At this point we see another set of killings and the toy animatronics get scrapped, whereas the withered ones, which were the original animatronics that got the kids stuffed inside them 2 years prior, are sent out to be repaired and sent to a new smaller location. This location runs for a few years before FNAF 1 in 1993. FNAF 1, while being the first game ever released, does not take place first in the timeline. If only it were that clean. Instead, it takes place in 1993 or around then, based on minimum wage calculations MatPat did in his first ever FNAF theory, and Scott pretty much confirming this to be correct. We can also look at the Faz facts presented in FNAF AR's files that say, quote, in 1993, the most dangerous profession in the United States was actually night security guard, which seems to indicate that the first game takes place in 1993, since we know the dates of the other games where we're actually security guards. This is also in line with the Nathan Dunlap story MatPat believed the first game to be based off of, however that could also be a coincidence. This is where we see the original 5 animatronics repaired after FNAF 2's location closed, and seemingly the first game where we play as Michael Afton, since at this point he'd be old enough to hold down a full-time job, being around 21 years old if we go off his character and Into the Pit. Speaking of which, that's our next stop. Into the Pit in 2011. Into the Pit is a difficult story to place timeline-wise, other than the part that takes place in 85. So how am I certain it takes place in 2011? Well, when Oswald is describing the town in the first few pages of the story, he says that the town went downhill after the mill had closed down. So I looked into towns that went downhill after some form of mill shut down that fit other requirements that he had listed. It had to have a movie theater like Oswald said his town did, and it had to still have a population despite being mostly run down. And the closest one that I could actually find was Scotia, California, whose Pacific Lumber Company closed in 2008 and was founded in 1863, meaning it would certainly be around for 1985 when the town is thriving, as we see in the story. And since Oswald also notes that 3 years ago is when the mill closed down, when he was 8, we can reasonably assume that since Pacific Lumber closed in 2008 that he was born in 2000 and is 11 years old at the time of the story, since it's 3 years after they closed. The population of Scotia is also only 850, which also would fit the story. Now this is important because of where the timeline goes next and how time travel could actually be involved. It also gives us an age for Mike, who, based on the kid from 1985's part of the story, was around Oswald's age that year, and considering how Crying Child died in 1983, 2 years before that part, it would most likely be the older brother who'd be 11 at that time, which also fits since he's wearing a hat and participating at a Freddy's, which the teen would really not want to do. Then we have FNAF AR in 2021. Okay, so based on dates that we can see on various emails from FNAF AR, which is where most of the lore resides in this game, the events of Special Delivery actually take place in 2021, this year, which is honestly really messed up for the timeline. I went into this wanting to see how long they'd have to hold on to the toy animatronics to see if they could be the basis for the Glamrock animatronics, yet I found out that FNAF AR takes place in 2021, meaning one of 4 things. Ness could not be Vanny, since Glitch Trap hasn't been created yet, since William hasn't even been found in the back room of Fazbear's Fright. 2, that the AR game is simply not canon to the story, which throws out all the fast facts and the emails as actual lore. 3, that Glitch Trap is able to time travel thanks to being present in technology or something similar like the ball pit from Into the Pit, which is possible since we know that time travel is possible in this universe, which is why I included Into the Pit in this video in the first place. Or 4, that Vanny isn't possessed by Glitch Trap and isn't a reluctant follower after all, and is instead a copycat. We can't know for sure which of these are the case until Security Breach actually comes out, and honestly that could ruin this whole video, but if we run on the assumption that Ness is Vanessa, aka Vanny, then Security Breach would also take place in 2021, if the FNAF AR emails match with the events of the games at least, meaning that somehow Vanny got possessed by Glitch Trap before he was ever created. If this game does not take place in 2021, however, we can rework this yet again come the game's release, but at this point, all we've got to go off of is the FNAF AR emails, which seem to indicate this. This could also cause issues like if Springtrap isn't going to be discovered for another couple years, why are there versions of him being released to the public in FNAF AR? Because like, they wouldn't know that he existed yet, right? A simple explanation to that is that they just found Springtrap before the events of FNAF 3, yet if this game does take place in 2021, it is actually possible for Vanessa to be a secret 4th Afton kid because they'd be the proper age and they do have a striking resemblance to Elizabeth. Next we have FNAF in 2023. FNAF 3 may also not have a simple timeline placement, however, the game description places it 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's closes, and the most recent closure we've seen would be the FNAF 1 closure in 1993, which would place FNAF 3 in 2023, which hasn't even happened in real life yet, so maybe we'll get a real Freddy Fazbear's for ourselves. This is when Springtrap is released in a new horror-themed Freddy's location called Fazbear's Fright, with seemingly no connection to the books, and is the company's first attempt at repairing their reputation by leaning into the horror genre. However, Henry ends up burning this place to the ground with William inside as well as the puppet, as we can see on a rare screen, except it doesn't work and William survives, because of course he does. This is also where we learn that the spirits of the original 5 missing children were put to rest in the Happiest Day minigame, which we must complete as Henry, based on Orville Elephant's dialogue in Ultimate Custom Night, and the secret final cutscene of Sister Location that shows down burnt Fazbear's Fright. Next up we have Sister Location, which is also most likely happening in 2023. Sister Location also probably takes place around the same time. We know at the very least it has to, thanks to that ending I mentioned moments ago, where Michael is describing how he's going to come find his father, where we see a burnt down Fazbear's Fright and Springtrap popping up from its ruins. This means that the game must happen at least at the same time, since at the moment of this line he hadn't found his father yet, which also means that we couldn't have played as Mike in FNAF 3 because he wouldn't be saying that he's going to come find you, because he already would have. This could be a flash forward, but I don't think that that could be the case, since at that point he'd be purple and smelling horrible, and if people are running away from him scared on the street when he's walking, how would they hire him to be the night guard at a Freddy's joint? Like, even if it is horror themed, he's there after hours and doesn't need to look the part. So the most likely scenario is that after William was released, he somehow instructed Michael to go find his sister. Or Baby actually ended up mimicking William in order to lure Mike down there, since she knew he wouldn't die and Ennard would be able to use him as a skin suit. Either way, it makes the most sense for the events of the main game of Sister Location to take place in 2023, whereas the events of the 8-bit sections take place before 1983, which are also the earliest moments we've seen in the series. Then we have FNAF 6, which takes place sometime after 2023. Now, I've had a hard time placing FNAF 6's exact time. I have yet to find that smoking gun that gives me how many years after 2023 the game takes place, yet we know it has to take place after 2023 for various reasons. One, the inclusion of Scraptrap. Whether it's a more deformed Springtrap suit or a new one altogether, William wasn't released until 2023, so it has to be after. 2. Scrap Baby. Baby gets kicked out of the Ender tribe between games in the source code for Scott's website, meaning that it has to take place after Sister Location, which seems to also happen in 2023. 3. The appearance of the Paper Pals, who made their debut in FNAF 3. 4. The appearance of both Henry and Mike, who decide to stay while the building is burning. And 5. Lefty, who was created to keep the puppet in that location so Charlie would actually be set free, since the puppet also escaped in FNAF 3 or was never there to begin with, which made Henry sure that it would be there this time. This is where we see the story attempt to be put to rest, with Baby, the puppet, Molten Freddy, who is a combination of all the Funtime animatronics, and Scraptrap all burning. But we know that William as Scraptrap escapes, even if horrifically burned by the fire, removing the entire Scraptrap suit and landing him in the hospital in a coma. That's where Ultimate Custom Night takes place, after the FNAF 6 fire. Ultimate Custom Night must take place after the FNAF 6 fire because it takes place in William's head, much like how FNAF 4 was in the Crying Child's head. Another reason I believe Crying Child to be the one you should not have killed. In addition to that, we see characters that made their first appearance in FNAF 6 present to torment William in Ultimate Custom Night, most notably the Rockstar animatronics and the Mediocre Melodies. This is also where we learn that Henry was the one who tried to release the original 5 missing children, thanks to Orville Elephant saying, quote, "He tried to release you, he tried to release us." However, running alongside this are the events prior to the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, which shows us what it's like in the real world during the events of Ultimate Custom Night. Since we're told that William has been there years prior to the story starting, this means that he's being tortured by the one you should not have killed for at least 2 years, as we learn, since he had, quote, been taken off life support years ago. While it could be more than 2, it has to at least be a couple years since the word years is in plural. And then finally, we have FNAF VR, which takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 and 2 years after William was taken off life support, since the priest who shows up in The Man in Room 1280 to read him his last rites was asked to do so again, quote, years after he was taken off life support, notice the plural, which happened at least 2 years after the FNAF 6 fire. At this point, if FNAF 3, 6, and 7 all take place one after each other, we'd be in 2027 at the very least. And we know that this game has to take place after FNAF 6 and The Man in Room 1280 thanks to the appearance of Glitchtrap, who appeared by scanning a circuit board to help create the AI, and Helpy, who makes an appearance as an Easter egg character and a main character in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. Helpy was introduced in FNAF 6, so it has to at least come after that, and we see the circuit board be created in The Man in Room 1280 when the priest brings William to a Fazbear Entertainment warehouse where he promptly explodes, meaning at the very least FNAF VR takes place in 2027, which is 6 years after FNAF AR and probably Security Breach, which begs the question, since William only becomes Glitchtrap 6 years after Ness is acting weird, as if she is possessed, this seems to be impossible unless Ness isn't possessed, isn't Vanny, or Glitchtrap is somehow able to time travel. But has time travel been established in the games? Actually, it might have been. See, one Twitter user pointed out to me that the animatronic arm we see at the end of the Security Breach gameplay trailer looks an awful lot like Nightmare Freddy's arm. And if that is the case, firstly it would require the Nightmare animatronics to have some real physical forms, unless they're doing some dream hopping, but it would also require time travel, since FNAF 4 is the first game in the timeline, taking place in 1983, 38 years before the earliest events of Security Breach if it does take place in 2021, which it seems to. Now, just to go over things first, what was my original timeline proposed in that last theory? Well, it starts with FNAF 4 in 1983 that we see thanks to the TV in Crying Child's house. Then we see the 1985 part of Into the Pit, followed by FNAF 2 and Freddy Fazbear's grand reopening in 1987. FNAF 1 takes place after that in 1993, calculated by Matt Patton in his first theory video, as well as being confirmed by a Faz fact from FNAF AR. Then comes Into the Pit with the present day at least the present day in the book, and I'm including Into the Pit because time travel would technically be required, and Into the Pit is what introduces time travel. And then we run into FNAF AR. Now, the FNAF AR emails have dates ranging the game from 2019 to 2021, which I'm guessing is dependent on when you are actually playing the game, since it's meant to be the present day. And since Security Breach is linked to special delivery via those emails and nests along with the other weird happenings, we can reasonably assume that Security Breach would come next. Then we have to fast forward 2 years and see FNAF 3 with the Fazbear Frights attraction and sister location happening simultaneously thanks to the secret sister location ending. And to end the current timeline, we have FNAF 6, Ultimate Custom Night, and VR happening one after each other. However, we only know that FNAF VR takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 thanks to the man in room 1280 from Bunny Call, the most controversial point in this timeline being FNAF 3 taking place after Security Breach and AR, which a lot of people seem to have issues with. Obviously, there are some discrepancies that need to be made when talking about the FNAF timeline, since as Scott sees the story play out in his mind, previous moments may not align to a perfect fit, so information that is revealed later should be taken as a priority. Like MatPat stated in his most recent timeline video after Ultimate Custom Night's release. So they didn't find Springtrap until night 2 of FNAF 3 would have to be replaced with them discovering Springtrap sooner than we thought, but only releasing him later on while trying to test to make sure everything was working before opening Fazbear's Fright, so that he could then appear as a character in special delivery, maybe perhaps as a way to hype up the actual location. But there's another problem that I want to address, saying that we have seen a Spring Bonnie time travel before, like in Into the Pit, so time travel is not out of the question for this scenario. There also seem to be quite a few people who believe that FNAF 3 takes place in 2013, since we know that the FNAF 4 location closed thanks to Crying Child getting chomped, so 30 years after 1983 would be 2013. However, the description for FNAF 3 states that, quote, 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, meaning that the establishment was indeed called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and to our understanding, that bite incident from FNAF 4 actually took place in Fredbear's Family Diner, thanks to the limited number of animatronics as well as them both being gold. While yes, other Freddy Fazbear's locations at this time were open, this incident did not occur at one, and this begs the question, does FNAF 3 rather take place in 2017, after the FNAF 2 location closes? Well, if we look back at that quote again, we know that that's not the case, since it says itself that, quote, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, which couldn't be the case given that the FNAF 1 location that takes place in 1993 wouldn't be open if that's really what happened. If the 1987 location was the last one to close, it would make sense, but there being another Freddy Fazbear's open in 1993 means that the tragedies have not yet become a distant memory, especially since they're posting news clippings about the original incidents on the walls. And even if we didn't put them there, someone else is posting them on the wall as a prank. Sure, the hallucinations may be what causes them to change, but they're not the reason they're actually on the wall. We can still see the articles when we aren't hallucinating anyways, like in the first few nights. So why do I think that FNAF 3 has to take place after Security Breach? Because there seems to be a lot going on. Hell, what I'm saying now could even be pointing towards Security Breach taking place in the 80s if you look at it a certain way, since, thanks to Montgomery Gator, we have all the proof we need. Take a look at the characters in the background of the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3, the ones in color at least. They have various different masks on that are each pretty much explained away thanks to the mediocre melodies introduced in FNAF 6, Pig Patch, Orville Elephant, and the Hippo guy. However, there are a couple outliers even with these other animatronics. The first one being the very first guy on this lineup who's wearing a green mask, which absolutely could be referring to Happy Frog, but that doesn't look like a freaking frog to me. Are you kidding? Frogs don't have those kind of faces. Even animatronic ones would not have a snout that goddamn long. A frog's face does not come out to here, people, okay? You know what does though? Alligators. And who do we see in Security Breach? A green alligator with a long snout. Who else do we see? A wolf who maybe seems to be the same color that Bonnie was, which as we learn is supposed to be blue despite looking purple. And what other mask do we see that doesn't have a mediocre melodies equivalent? A blue mask with a snout like a wolf would have. Interesting. So, are the two new main lineup animatronics actually present in the Happiest Day minigame. We can't say for certain after all because these are 8-bit, but it certainly makes a hell of a lot more sense now, right? Plus I don't care if it's a robotic frog or not, okay? No frog is going to have that freaking snout, okay? It's not gonna be out here, and it's not gonna be this thin, okay? That's an alligator. So there we have it, friends, the smoking gun that explains how Security Breach could take place before FNAF 3. Based on FNAF AR emails, the closing of FNAF 1's location, and the Happiest Day minigame, everyone who was telling me I was wrong in the comments can finally accept that it's a possibility. After all, it's just a theory. One of many that we have on the channel, so you should check out any of our other nearly 300 FNAF videos. Yeah. I can't believe that it's possible. I can't. Oh my god. Yeah, I'm probably gonna cry. Links up in the top right corner. I don't know which one it is anymore because I was pointing at this one, but then I thought it was this one. I kept pointing at this one, and it turns out it was this. So it's one of these two. All right. What do you think? And is there anything else that you would like me to try to explain about this theory? Be sure to let me know down below. Speaking of comments, I'm going to respond to some comments from previous videos. Purple Fox said, "I just call Crying Child CC because it's shorter to write and kind of sounds like a name. Even though I think the chance is high he's called Evan, it's not confirmed, so I won't use it." This is actually my line of thinking as well. It's fine to theorize about the name, but until it's confirmed, you shouldn't be treating it as fact. And I also just write CC in my scripts instead of Crying Child because it's easier. I also have an acronym for the one you should not have killed now, because Jesus Christ, that's a lot to type. One Speedy Yoshi said, "You don't understand a thing about Springtrap or the man in room 1280, do you? That's just stupid." Well, considering how you went on to say that I don't understand that these books take place in another universe, I'm going to guess that you didn't watch that whole video or read Scott's Reddit post about the Fazbear Frights books. Scott himself said that while they aren't in the same universe, they will help to fill in some blanks from the previous games. The man in room 1280 was to demonstrate that William was being kept alive by a spirit instead of dying in the Springlock suit that turned him into Springtrap, because honestly, you know what, him being kept alive by a spirit is way cleaner than having a dead body run around. It also showed us that he was being tortured in his own head for Ultimate Custom Night, and that the kid who possessed him is male, even though that last one may be a little iffy. And if you read the second to last page or so of the Freddy Files Updated Edition, it says to take a closer look at the novels to see how it affects the story of the games as well. So I suggest that you watch the whole video next time before commenting, since I'm pretty sure I mentioned those. And even if I didn't, those statements are openly available to all, and are in MatPat videos. So you should have known about them, considering how most of you are only here because MatPat isn't covering FNAF and hasn't been for a while. Gamer Pro Action said, you still haven't talked about that Glamrock Freddy is Michael Afton. I have mentioned that in a video before. Well, that he represents the older brother, whoever that ends up being, and if that is the case, Gregory would be Crying Child, but then Crying Child is hiding inside his older brother, like how the brother is a recreation of the Crying Child in robot form, and that's how I mentioned it last time too, so come at me. Golden Master said, "Security Breach is after all FNAF games." Look, I'm happy to be proven wrong when the game actually comes out, okay? If that's the case, then I'm happy to rework the timeline again. However, if that is the case, we'll have to ignore everything weird that's going on in FNAF AR, since at that point those emails will be like 6 years old at the very least. And in that case, Ness cannot be Vanny. Based on the dates in AR, AR comes before FNAF 3, so Ness, it cannot be Vanny if Security Breach comes after all the games, I'm just saying. But either way, even if that is the case, it doesn't explain how FNAF AR has versions of Springtrap, okay? Unless they were doing it to advertise the Rise of Fazbear's Fright like I was suggesting earlier. Hey, I'm happy to be proven wrong, okay? Now, based on the points I made last time, there are a few things that we need to go over. Firstly, the breaking and entering does not apply in the actual game, but can come into play later on. He is 100% trespassing though, despite being locked inside. He actively hid inside of Freddy, like in his stomach, instead of leaving the Pizzaplex, which would make this trespassing. Every time I mention stealing, like in the merch, the security badges, even Freddy, there's no arguing that. He does in fact steal those. The main argument against these is that, well, he needs to do this to survive, which is blatantly not true. Okay, Freddy informs Gregory that the doors will reopen at 6 AM. All Gregory needs to do at that point is just stay in Freddy's green room or the area behind it until 6. Nothing else was necessary in order for him to survive. The only problems occur when Gregory tries to get out sooner. He causes his own problems. Vanny only ends up knowing Gregory is in the Lost and Found because she put him there as Vanessa. So, with that logic in mind, Vanny would not have known that Gregory was in Freddy or Freddy's green room. He says that himself. And Vanessa does not check inside Freddy when you approach true while piloting him. So as far as the argument that he needed to do this to survive, no he didn't. Unless he ends up making the problems himself, which would completely destroy his case. So, glad we got that settled. One of the other points of contention was really everything else he did was in self-defense. He had to destroy the animatronics. He had to kill Vanny in the phaser blast ending, otherwise they would have killed him. But while self-defense does sometimes justify killing in order to protect yourself or your loved ones, this is typically used for human-on-human interactions. Human-on-robot interactions wouldn't necessarily fall under self-defense. The animatronics would have to be proven that they didn't intend to harm Gregory, and this could be done using code analysis and camera footage. However, we know that the animatronics were hacked, and whoever Client 46 is did the hacking. Now, if Client 46 is Gregory, which in the context of this world they would know, and the evidence seems to actually point to, the fact that the animatronics were after him could be seen as his fault, since he actually disturbed their original programming. This is also where the footage of him in the Pizzaplex would have come out, particularly the image where he was talking to someone with rabbit ears, thus showing the jury that Gregory and Vanny had a personal relationship, further hurting his case. Gregory by no means had to destroy the animatronics. He chose to do it. Freddy even asks him not to. Gregory didn't do it because he had to. He did it because he wanted revenge. He even says it himself, quote, "They get what they deserve." He was destroying them for revenge and to get the parts for Freddy, not so that they wouldn't hurt him. Since after all, they can still come and kill him after he destroys them. So he does destroy property because he wanted the animatronics to suffer, not because he had to in order to be safe again. Again, could have just hid in Freddy's room or somewhere else. People are also saying that he's homeless, so he has to steal. Firstly, homeless or not, it's still illegal to steal. And secondly, I don't think that he needs Roxy balloons, action figures, and stuffed characters in order to survive another day. I'm not saying that he shouldn't keep himself alive, I'm just saying that what he's doing is illegal, which is true no matter who you are. And anything I included in those numbers was not a story item, and instead the extra items that you do not need in order to beat the game. And he didn't need to steal Freddy at all. There is no justification for him running off with Freddy other than the fact that they're friends. But then again, it's grand larceny and illegal. One commenter decided to try and provide legal defense for Gregory in a lighthearted manner because that was also the point of the video. So I'd like to reply to Jason Ross's defense for the theft of security badges. Quote from his comment, "While this is technically a crime, I think he could make a strong case with any halfways decent lawyer that he did so out of necessity. He stole stuff to help further his attempts to escape unlawful confinement and other crimes committed against him. Stealing those items he stole was necessary to save himself. He would never have survived the night if he didn't steal." First of all, you just outright admitted that it was a crime, which an actual attorney would have torn to shreds. Secondly, like I've been saying, he could have been hiding the entire time, okay? He would have survived if he had just hid until 6. He doesn't escape any sooner than 6 a.m. You progressing throughout the game just makes the time go to 6. He never escapes sooner. He did not have to steal the security badges. Unlawful confinement, as you said, is described as whoever wrongfully restrains a person as to prevent that person to move beyond a certain restricted limit is said to have committed the offense of wrongful confinement. However, nobody restrains Gregory, literally, as well. Like, they don't actually time to anything. He gets himself locked in the Pizzaplex. Nobody locked him in there intentionally. The doors close automatically at midnight, and he had plenty of time to leave, but didn't, and he chose to climb inside Freddy, which also ruins your argument against trespassing, which was also wrongful confinement. And for all intents and purposes, in the eyes of the law and any outsiders, Vanessa was actively trying to help him. There are recordings of her claiming to have called the police, which would have been verified certainly, but even if she had called them and claimed something else, the record of her calling 911 would be there. Most of Ross's case relies on unlawful confinement, however, staying in somewhere and then wanting to leave does not constitute unlawful confinement. And to the public, Vanessa was trying to help get him home, but he was avoiding her. We know that she was trying to kill him, but the public doesn't. Now for the biggest issue that everyone seemed to have with this list, the one that I'm sure y'all clicked on this video for. The claim that killing Vanny was murder and not self-defense. And this claim is really the reason I wanted to make this video, because I can't reply to every single comment that was referring to this, okay? Self-defense can be a defense to an assault, battery, and criminal homicide because it always involves the use of force. Most states have special requirements when the defendant uses deadly force in self-defense. Deadly force is defined as any force that could potentially kill. An individual does not have to actually die for the force to be considered deadly. Examples of deadly force are the use of a knife, gun, person, vehicle, or even bare hands when there is a disparity in size between the two individuals. Or, in this case, the use of animatronic robots to kill Vanny, as Gregory does in the Phaser Blast ending, which would also set a precedent for robots being counted as deadly force. To successfully claim self-defense, a defendant must prove 4 elements. First, with exceptions, the defendant must prove that he or she was confronted with an unprovoked attack. Second, the defendant must prove that the threat of injury or death was imminent. Third, the defendant must prove that the degree of force used in self-defense was objectively reasonable under the circumstances. And fourth, the defendant must prove that he or she had an objectively reasonable fear that he or she was going to be injured or killed unless he or she used self-defense. The Model Penal Code defines self-defense as justifiable when the actor believes that such force is immediately necessary for the purposes of protecting himself against the use of unlawful force by such other person on the present occasion. Okay, so I'm willing to admit that the attack was certainly unprovoked. Vanny did not need to come after him in order to get him out of the pizzaplex. However, that second issue, the proof of threat of injury or death was imminent, is where things get complicated. At no point in the game does Vanny directly threaten Gregory with any words. Her voice lines include, "See you soon," "Disassemble Freddy," "There you are you having fun yet?" laughter, and "Let's have some fun." While menacing, none of these involve a direct threat. At no point in the game does she brandish a knife or even send the security bots after Gregory to disassemble him. She only sends the 3 main ones to collect him, who also make no appearance in this ending, therefore do not count. Yes, when she catches us we get a game over screen, but that's just us losing the game. That isn't necessarily us being killed. Us thinking that we get killed is simply an assumption because we don't see what happens next. However, in this case, since we made it to the end, Gregory had never been caught by Vanny. While yes, she does end up destroying an animatronic, it was just an animatronic. That's not really a threat on Gregory. Now, let's skip point number 3 for a minute and then move on to point number 4. That the defendant must prove that he or she had an objectively reasonable fear that he or she was going to be injured or killed unless they used self-defense. While yes, Gregory is a child, or seemingly a child, who would have a more extreme view of the world, he literally spent 6 hours running and hiding from Vanny, where he ended up surviving. In fact, he was right at the pizzaplex door to leave, but instead of leaving, he chose to go after Vanny, thus turning this act of possible self-defense into a possible act of vigilantism, or even turning Gregory into the aggressor. He and Freddy went to confront Vanny. He says himself maybe that they can catch her in her room at Phaser Blast. Gregory could have left and survived, but chose not to, meaning that he cannot claim self-defense in an altercation that he created. And now for the final point. The defendant must prove that the degree of force used in self-defense was objectively reasonable under the circumstance. Now, being a child, there is a leeway as to what he would deem reasonable force, but in this case, it is absolutely not reasonable force. We see how destroyed Freddy is after he gets disassembled, okay? His chest and torso are gaping open. He had his insides ripped out. And then, he even ends up, dying in an animatronic sense, even though his body and his head have been shown to work separately. And then, Gregory orders the same thing done to Vanny, a human, who would be alive as the animatronics ripped her ribs and intestines from her body. Does that sound reasonable to you? Because killing in self-defense is easiest to claim when the death you cause is quick or painless. But Vanny suffered, and suffered hard. Even criminals on death row do not get this treatment. A serial killer with more kills than Vanny would just get the simple 2-dose lethal injection, where the first dose actually is intended to dull the pain of the second dose. Under absolutely no circumstances would Vanny being torn apart so badly that the comic panels won't even show it be considered the proper amount of force. Especially when he could have said anything to stop or break or even kill. He could have just said kill. This is absolutely over the top, especially given that Gregory seems to have known her if he is indeed Client 46, which is also hinted at during the Princess Quest ending, but since that's a different ending, that doesn't really count here. Which, if he was Client 46, that would have appeared in court. So what kind of charges and juvenile time is Gregory facing because of this? Well, if Gregory had Mac Murdock as a lawyer, let's say, or as someone who's also a really good lawyer, they could possibly argue that this would rather be manslaughter than murder. However, Gregory knows what disassemble means, so an argument that this was an accident would be very tough to pull off. But looking at the minimum sentence, there are 3 possible outcomes for how he'd be treated. 1. The child is so young or mentally incompetent to not understand what they've done and are excused for criminal and civil liability from their actions. Not the case for Gregory, who knew full well what was going on the entire time throughout this game. 2. The child is old enough to understand what they have done, but not old enough or lacking in evidence of sufficient premeditation to charge them as an adult, so they are charged and tried as juveniles, which could be the case for Gregory and is the most likely outcome. And then 3. The child is old enough to understand what they have done and there is evidence of planning and premeditation such that they can be deemed to have acted as an adult might, and they are charged as an adult, with the exception that minors may not be sentenced to death. Now, this could be the way that the courts decided to go, since after all, Gregory did intend on confronting Vanny, since he could have left the Pizzaplex but instead went after her. If he is Client 46 as well, the images of him breaking into the Pizzaplex before could be interpreted as premeditation, especially if he was investigating the Pizzaplex because of Vanny. The state could also argue that his intention was always to kill her. So, with these rules in mind, we will look at a minimum and maximum sentence. The minimum would be a manslaughter charge. However, unlike murder, manslaughter does not carry an automatic sentence of life imprisonment. It remains, however, an opinion for the court. But looking at the situation, things wouldn't look too good for Gregory. A 9-year sentence, which is not uncommon, would allow the offender to be paroled after serving 3 years of their sentence. If a firearm is involved in the offense though, a minimum sentence of 4 years is required. And while the weapon was not a firearm, it could be argued that since she was a distance from him that it could also be considered similar. So at least Gregory would be looking at 3 to 9 years for manslaughter. If he was charged with murder, however, he would absolutely be tried as an adult. And since this is the worst case, we'll go with first-degree murder since the court could consider this planned and deliberate. Those convicted of first-degree murder all receive the same sentence: life imprisonment with parole eligibility after 25 years. A 20-year-old convicted of first-degree murder will be eligible for parole at the age of 45, and if they behave themselves, then they're likely to receive parole. But considering Gregory's personality and your comments on that top 10 video, I doubt that he'd admit responsibility, show remorse. He doesn't seem like that kind of person. Although after 25 years, he may start looking at things differently, with new eyes, if you will. This is also if he ends up actually aging because he's a real human and not a robot like we're all thinking. And if he doesn't age, a whole new investigation is gonna happen. So let's not get into that. There we have it, friends. Definitive proof that Gregory is a criminal and did not need to kill Vanny or really steal anything from the Pizzaplex. He puts himself in danger by confronting her instead of leaving, and while yes, in the bad ending he dies, how's he supposed to know that? Okay, it's not like, oh no, if I leave her I'm dead, so I might as well go down swinging. That's not how this works, okay? So don't even try with me in the comments, although I'm pretty sure at least 5 of you have already done that. First, let's see what we know about the client just based on what's in the recordings and not compare it to anyone else, so we can form an objective profile of Client 46. In their first tape, we get the therapist saying, quote, "You know, everyone associated with this company gets performance reviews, right? Which means that they're associated with a company, which most would assume to be Fazbear Entertainment. However, they're asked in another tape if, quote, do you know a place called Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex? I'll take your silence as a yes. And besides, I know you know it because the technicians who work for Pizzaplex know you. Or rather, I guess it would be better to say they think they do. Which means that they wouldn't be dealing with Fazbear Entertainment. Otherwise, they would know about the Pizzaplex because they know the company, not because the technicians know them. We know that the fourth therapist characterizes them as a loner, and their second therapist considers them a hacker, mentioning their aptitude with technology. Client 46 also has a relatively normal family, but lies to the therapist about having a troubled past. They hacked some form of system and glitched out some of the animatronics, was caught on tape talking to what the therapist described as rabbit ears, and they remain unbothered when finding out 2 of their former therapists went missing, and 1 was found dead, mangled in machinery, as if they're used to death and or already knew about the therapists. So those are all the things we know as fact for Client 46. However, there's also some stuff we can infer, but since it's me connecting the dots, there may be some accidental bias, so I'm keeping this separate from the rest of the facts. The client here does appear to be younger. Given the tonal shift between the therapists, between when they're talking to Vanessa and talking to Client 46, which could be the reason the tapes with Vanessa were included. Going back to the age issue, when being asked about encrypted communications which seem to be manipulative in nature, the therapist says, quote, "Well, the texts say it looked to them like it was an attempt to manipulate you, or maybe to lure you somewhere." This is the same language used when educating kids about predators and online safety. Hell, I'm pretty sure I feel like I've heard that exact line in grade school. So how can we know if this is specifically Gregory, you ask? Like, sure, it's a young boy, but how could we know if it's Gregory if we aren't actually given a name? There are a couple clues to indicate this. Firstly, he is associated with some company related to Fazbear Entertainment. We know it's probably not Fazbear Entertainment directly, but with the technicians sending over footage of one of your clients, you can guess that the companies are related. So it would most likely be a subsidiary of Fazbear Entertainment. Using the other discs as a time frame, we know that Vanessa has not yet been promoted to security guard, and that Lewis, the IT guy from FNAF AR, is currently working in marketing, not IT. So at least disc 1 takes place before FNAF AR, and seemingly by disc 5 they're in their spots that they were in during FNAF AR, with IT questioning Vanessa's search history. This leads me to the conclusion that the company they're associated with is the one controlling the distribution and creation of the animatronics in special delivery. But what companies have we seen that control renting out and creating animatronics? That's right, Afton Robotics. Present in sister location, and the reason there was no Funtime Chica in that game, but why there was one in Ultimate Custom Night. The company being named after, and originally run by the one who caused the company's rep to plummet in the first place, would also understandably have psych evals for anyone associated with them, so it explains that as well. So, running with this idea that Afton Robotics is controlling the FNAF AR animatronics, how does Gregory fit into all of this? Well, for that, we need to work out who this potential bunny-eared person is. Some assume Glitch Trap, some think it's Vanny. It could also technically be Burn Trap. However, the therapist never really gives us a color of the ears, only the detail that they look like bunny ears. Burn Trap's ears are horrifically destroyed, so he's out. Glitch Trap is a computer code with no physical form, so that just leaves Vanny, which also discounts the theory that Client 46 is Vanny. This also makes sense with the timeline of the CDs, since Vanessa mentions making a bunny costume in disc 11, moves to a new location after disc 12, and the bunny ears are mentioned on disc 15. The disc after that is also the last one with Client 46, knowing that they aren't coming back. This to me suggests that Vanessa and Gregory moved around the same time, which would also explain why Gregory was being evaluated, since he was associated with the company through Vanessa, although that can't be confirmed. But there are also other odd details that I picked up on that I wanted to address, like how we never hear Client 46 talk, but they do end up responding, as we see in discs 6 and 8. They say something, but the recording doesn't pick it up, or their response is wiped out, much like how Gregory was wiped from the Pizzaplex's system. 46 also shows up to the Pizzaplex randomly, unannounced, despite not working there, and in the picture that showcased the bunny ears, we can also hear that the camera is distorted around them, but that the therapist still says that the blob, I guess, looks like Client 46. So why would the camera be distorted around us? Seems to me like it could be when you take a picture of a computer screen with your phone and you get those lines going across the screen, or like how shapeshifters in Supernatural have the laser eyes when they're on camera. It seems like this person isn't entirely human, perhaps part robot. Robot speculation aside, I feel confident in the fact that Client 46 is Gregory. The only issue I have now is why was he hacking the animatronics? He definitely had a purpose, since to quote disc 16, what I understand is that the glitch stopped being a glitch and turned into an intentional set of subroutines that were aimed at creating the same thing the glitch created. Those subroutines seem to have come from you. Can you explain that? And don't worry there, Doc, I think I can explain it. There is either a good or evil motive for this hack, and I don't really know which is more likely, but I have a feeling as to which ones. But let's look at both. The evil motive would be that Gregory is working with William and Vanessa, so he hacked the animatronics and made sure that the glitch he caused instilled itself into the robots so that his work wouldn't be undone, to perhaps distract them from what's going on underneath the Pizzaplex. Hence why he would be talking to Vanny all nonchalant, like seems to be the case in that photo I mentioned. The good intention, however, which is the one I think would push the story further ahead and is probably the more likely one, is that Gregory is indeed a crying child robot. He learned of his father's misdeeds and whatnot over the years, and before being transferred into the next aged up model, he ran away. Over the next 40 some odd years, he would learn about coding in order to hopefully be able to counter what his father had been doing. But once he heard of the FNAF 6 fire, he figured it was all over. Once Fazbear Entertainment came back with a VR game and a special delivery system for new animatronics though, he realized what he needed to do. So he got on Vanessa's good side through possible manipulation and looking like a 5-year-old to get close to the company. He lied about his family history to the therapists so that they would keep seeing him and he would have more time in the company building so that he could then hack the animatronics, causing them to malfunction in an effort to get the company or the project at least shut down. Hence why the glitch ended up being a closed loop where it kept replicating itself so it couldn't be deleted. But when the company didn't shut down and instead built a giant mall complex, Gregory went to investigate, hacking the cameras in an effort to conceal his identity, which resulted in him finding the Vanny mask and learning that Vanessa was under his father's control. Since the line about the bunny ears goes, quote, "You're talking to someone or something," it's hard to tell. But it also being a still shot, we don't know if he is really talking, or just shocked, or talking to himself about the situation. 46 talking to themselves had also been well established at this point. He could have also lost his memory when he climbed inside of Freddy, because he could have been inside Freddy when he was being repaired, and it could have just caused a whole lot of issues. This association with Vanessa and Vanny, however, is why he's willing to get ice cream with her after the Princess Quest ending. That's still the only way to explain it. Them knowing each other is the only reason he would get ice cream with a woman who just spent 6 hours trying to kill him. And it explains how he knows to complete the Princess Quest games in order to save her soul. Now, I'm not some MatPat sympathizer who wants to defend him so he'll notice me or something, because this is a theory that I've had since the Funko statues were revealed. At least I think they're by Funko. At least the statues for the game, once they were revealed, I've had this theory. So I am truly looking at the theory and not blinded by my like or dislike of MatPat. I'm simply looking at what we've been presented with to see if what we've been saying here, in my eyes, is truly possible. One of the main reasons everyone seems to be so frustrated by this idea is because it's far-fetched. Is it really though? Like, let's look at some of the elements of the series and really talk about what the series has actually gone through, okay? Kids have been stuffed into animatronic suits only to end up possessing them. Those spirits were then released when William Afton decided to disassemble the animatronics and were able to scare him into getting trapped in his own animatronic suit. William has survived 3 fires while being present in all of them for the entirety of them, as we see in Sister Location's ending, where he was in Fazbear Frights after it had already been burnt down for a while. We see in Security Breach that he was still in the FNAF 6 location after it had burnt down, meaning that he was there for the whole fire, and he was literally standing in fire multiple times during the final fight in Security Breach's true ending. None of those times has he been completely killed either. Also, none of the FNAF 6 animatronics were actually wiped out. They were just melded into one blob. A woman who was simply testing a VR game had her body taken over by a sentient virus that was able to lock her subconscious in a mobile game that was then ported to an arcade cabinet without letting her regain control of her body, and despite how many kids have gone missing, people continue to come back to the Fazbear restaurants, despite it basically being a giant casino game as to whether you're going home with your kid at this point. And that's only in the games. There are plenty of similar elements going on in the books, and while yes, the books aren't canon to the games, they share information and help explain what what can and cannot be possible in this game world as Scott sees it. The sound illusion discs that plenty of people consider to be the cause for FNAF 4's animatronics first appeared in the Twisted Ones novel and hasn't had a canon appearance in the games. A disc people think could be an illusion disc can be found in Sister Location, but in that game they call it a power module. Therefore, it is not confirmed to be a sound disc. If you believe that FNAF 4's nightmare animatronics are the result of illusions created by sound emitted from discs, you cannot dismiss his theory because he used the books to prove it. Because that's literally what you're doing with the FNAF 4 sound discs, okay? They're from the books, so that's a double standard. The reveal of William Afton's name came from the Silver Eyes novel as well, which was proven to be true in the Sister Location opening scene during William Afton's interview seemingly with the police. And in the books, there is a legit kid who was turned into a series of robots so that she could grow up like a normal person despite being killed, and they're both named Charlotte or some variation of it. Charlie, for example, in the books. So, children being animatronics is not a stretch for these games, and it's already been present in some aspects of the FNAF lore. While the story and the sequence of events from the novel are not canon to the games, they both share similar characters and ideas that we can't just ignore because they're presented in another medium. Another thing I see popping up quite a lot is that a brown-haired, dark-eyed white character can really be anybody. It's been memed incredibly hard, with various people putting plenty of characters over that frame in his episode, with some people saying that he's just comparing two white kids, so of course they look the same. I want to say how this argument of he could be anyone is absolutely ridiculous, because while yes, he is comparing the characters he wants to compare and comparing seemingly meaningless things, take a look at this picture of how Crying Child is presented to us in FNAF 4. This is the only real view we have of this character. He is literally an 8-bit character that's like 64 pixels high with less detail than a picture of Sudbury in a snowstorm. So design choices like hair color and stripes on the shirt are the only way we're able to compare characters and identify Crying Child. And logically, if Scott was making Gregory a robot Crying Child, they would not have the exact same outfit. And like, how would you picture Crying Child in a 3D medium? Because Gregory's design makes a lot of sense. And if you dropped Gregory down to 8-bit like you would see in FNAF 4, they would still look awfully similar. There is also the point that Gregory's vision gets weird when approached by Vanny. And keep in mind, it's only Vanny specifically and not any other enemies. This is hard to explain if Gregory is just some random kid, because the effect we see on screen is that of an old camera when like you'd bring a magnet close to it. The reason it would only happen around Vanny is due to her being controlled by the sentient virus we see take control in FNAF VR, since she seems to be the only one able to spread it aside from Burn Trap. And notice that in normal gameplay we can't actually get near Burn Trap, so we can't know if he was meant to give us this effect. Yes, in the game we can get to him, but that's through a glitch. So if that error wasn't there in the game, we wouldn't know if he did or did not give us this effect. And since we aren't supposed to get to him, they wouldn't code it in, because why would there be a logical reason for him to have that effect if he's not going to get close to us? And the last bit of rebuttal I'm seeing as to how Gregory is not a robot Crying Child is that he's too young for it, since Crying Child died in 1983. Are you serious? Guys, it's a robot, okay? It wouldn't age. When Charlie was made into a robot, she literally had to have 4 separate versions so that she could then grow up to be an adult. This could simply be a younger version of the Crying Child robot that ran away from home, hence why he lives on the streets, and therefore could reasonably have as much life experience as he seemingly does. This kid is able to drive a van, is willing to kill Vanny in the disassemble ending, is able to use the jumper cables on a car battery to fix Freddy's power issue properly, and is able to speak full sentences despite seemingly being small enough to fit inside Freddy, random baby strollers, and other various bits around the Pizzaplex. Keep in mind that the opening inside Freddy is very small. That's an awful lot of knowledge that a 12-year-old, if he even is supposed to be 12, wouldn't realistically have, especially if he was homeless and or living inside the Pizzaplex. It's almost as if this kid has 40 years of life experience, which would only be possible if he he was in fact a robot. The whole being a robot for 40 years thing would also explain why he would no longer fear the animatronics, if he is at least meant to be a robot crying child, which could also explain why he decides to stay at the end of the game, because he has more experience and knows that no one else is gonna do anything. There we have it, friends. Is Gregory a robot? It's not confirmed, but the possibility is there, and there's no denying it. And is Gregory a robot crying child? Honestly, it's less likely, but considering how Scott keeps bringing William Afton back, can we really consider anyone as permanently gone in this series? I don't think so.